Elizabeth, tens que fazer ali um compasso de uns segundos.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Bom dia a todos. Da nossa conferência SATT, que está a ser organizada aqui na Universidade de Aveiro. I'm very happy and honored to be chairing this plenary session with four very interesting, nationally, internationally renowned personalities from both academia and practice that share with us today some of their ideas, reflections, research, and experiences. And I start first with presenting Ana Garcia. I'm not sure if we are already on the streaming. Perhaps not. I'm simultaneously looking here to another screen, and I do not see that we are present yet. So perhaps I have to start again. Perhaps Celeste or I do not see our session yet, so.
Technology, eh?
Yeah. Oh. I see our rector speaking now, but that is another session.
To have some feedbacks from João Oliveira, Elizabeth,
Huh?
no? To have some feedback from João Oliveira.
From João Oliveira. Celeste tells me to continue, but I don't see us on the streaming yet. João Oliveira, are you there? Não estamos. Penso que há aqui problema com o streaming neste momento. Perhaps I can solve my configuration problem in the meantime. One thing solved.
Professora Celeste, consegue-me ouvir? Hein?
Sim, Pedro, sim. Passa-se alguma coisa?
Não está a conseguir partilhar a apresentação, certo?
Não, a Elizabeth é que disse que não estava a ouvir.
Muito bem.
Não.
Parece-me que agora estamos online. Eu não estava a ver aqui.
Já estamos há muito tempo, não é?
Muito
Nós
bem.
estamos online, sim.
Muito bem. Então, muito bom dia outra vez. Good morning, everybody. I'm very pleased and honored to be chairing this session, this plenary session, with four very interesting, nationally renowned and internationally renowned personalities who have dedicated a lot of their energy to studying and working with social and accessible tourism. We come now to the presentations, and I start with presenting Ana Garcia, who has a master's degree in Universal Accessibility and Design for All and a degree in Business Organization and Marketing. She is president of Accessible Portugal, an association dedicated to promoting accessible and inclusive tourism in Portugal. And since 2008, she has been developing the Accessible Portugal brand in different aspects of the tourism value chain, especially dedicated to the public with special needs. She's also a consultant, trainer, has been promoting accessibility, qualifying the accessible tourism offer. This work was recognized through the 2018 Medal of Tourism Merit, Accessible Tourism, awarded by the Secretary of State for Tourism. She is also a member of board of ENAT, the European Network of Accessible Tourism, and the legal representative of this organization in Portugal. Thank you very much for being with us today, and so you can start your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very proud to have this kind of subject well in a conference. So I am very proud to be a keynote speaker in this in your conference. I will speak in Portuguese because I think it is a way to be accessible also. All my presentation is with a slideshow in English, and of course I am totally at the disposal of the conferences and the participants to answer in English any question with no problem, but I will speak in Portuguese, okay? Thank you, and I hope that we'll be able to understand and to, well, to be happy to see our program. Oh, I will start to see where is my presentation. Wow, I can't see it.
No, it's not there yet. We see now your emails. You need to select another.
Maybe it's just on. Maybe you've got the presentation open and the bottom bar. So
okay.
Once you share your screen, you just need to click on where the presentation is on the bottom bar. Maybe.
I'll try it again.
No compartilhar tela há várias imagens abertas. Tem que clicar depois na imagem da apresentação.
Okay. So here we are. I hope that you can see my presentation now.
Perfect.
Yes? Okay. So I am going to present a project. I will speak in Portuguese, but this project is about accessible tourism and social inclusion. And we are very happy to have this opportunity to work together with the entity that manage the Turismo do Centro. So, well, I'm going to explain. Access Tour is a project that intends, I'm changing my sheep, sorry. O projeto Access Tour é projeto que tem como objetivo o desenvolvimento do turismo acessível e da inclusão social. Tem como base a qualificação da oferta turística, mas também da procura turística, isto é, das pessoas que precisam de acessibilidade para viajar, seja ou para visitar os territórios, seja acessibilidade física, seja comunicacional, seja inclusivamente de serviços qualificados para as suas necessidades específicas, e as próprias pessoas têm que saber do que precisam para que a oferta também se qualifique e haja efetivamente aqui um ciclo virtuoso de qualificação generalizada. Queremos desmistificar preconceitos e estereótipos através deste projeto, e por isso algumas das atividades vão a montante do setor do turismo, tendo consciência de que só desconstruímos preconceitos e estereótipos com mais de 20 ou 30 anos de trabalho incisivo nestas matérias. E, obviamente, queremos o desenvolvimento económico e social e todo o potencial de desenvolvimento da região centro. Portanto, o projeto tem uma extensão bastante ampla no tempo e no território, são 39 meses de intervenção, já dá para fazer alguma coisa, e, portanto, iniciámos este trabalho em janeiro de 2019 e vamos terminar em março de 2022. Este terminar é um terminar teórico da candidatura, mas efetivamente continuaremos no terreno porque se estabeleceram muitas relações, como devem calcular, para além, portanto, do aspecto administrativo e burocrático da candidatura, continuaremos a trabalhar neste território. Abrange 90 autarquias, 90 municípios, com as 7 comunidades intermunicipais. Lamentavelmente, Leiria, por questões burocráticas, não conseguiu participar e é uma pena porque é efetivamente um território onde já muita coisa foi feita. Mas nós pescámos à linha alguns stakeholders desta região. O Access Tour baseou-se em 2 projetos, porque é assim também que é pensada esta linha de apoio, baseou-se em 2 projetos que são complementares. Um deles tem uma abordagem muito casuística, muito personalizada ao estádio de desenvolvimento do stakeholder no que diz respeito à temática do turismo acessível. Temos uma diversidade num país que mesmo assim, num território, região centro, que é muito pequeno, mas temos uma diversidade de desenvolvimento face à temática muito, muito grande. E percebemos que uma forma de conseguir captar e cativar os stakeholders era ter esta abordagem mais casuística e de acordo com esse estádio de desenvolvimento, fazendo uma motivação e não sempre mostrando aquilo que ainda não tinham feito e aquilo que eram obrigados a fazer, não. É acolher, é dizer que já estão a fazer muitas coisas, que isto é importante. Portanto, esta abordagem de proximidade é-nos dada pelo projeto Brandate. E depois uma outra abordagem que nos permite dar visibilidade a tudo aquilo de bom que já está feito em cada um dos agentes, quer sejam empresas, quer sejam entidades públicas, portanto, destinos inclusivamente. A plataforma Tour for All ajuda-nos, é uma plataforma ibérica e ajuda-nos efetivamente a ser a montra, a promover tudo aquilo de bom que já se tem feito. Portanto, uma imagem institucional da nossa plataforma, que tem efetivamente um website e uma app e é partilhada com Espanha, portanto, assumindo que a Ibéria é um destino turístico importante e não é concorrente Portugal e Espanha, apesar de haver alguma concorrência, nós não somos concorrentes, somos parceiros e queremos cativar mercados de grandes dimensões, nomeadamente de outros continentes. Este projeto tem muitas atividades, estão a ver 39 meses, e a principal atividade foram visitas técnicas, auditorias ao estado da arte básica da acessibilidade em diversos stakeholders públicos e privados. Tínhamos, com as 8 comunidades intermunicipais, tínhamos um target de 400. Neste momento, apenas nas 7 comunidades já estamos com 450 visitas técnicas. Temos também a identificação e promoção de 5 itinerários turísticos por cada comunidade intermunicipal, que dá 35 itinerários, portanto, o levantamento das condições de acessibilidade dos itinerários, porque é um produto turístico importante, e aí colocar no desenvolvimento de uma aplicação IT-Tour que também se liga à Tour for All. Muita ação de formação, muita ação de sensibilização e, como vos dizia há pouco, para desconstruir preconceitos e estereótipos, subimos na cadeia até às crianças. Porquê? Porque já existe no ensino profissional do turismo, já existem oferta relativamente à temática do turismo acessível, os cursos de especialização tecnológica já têm um módulo de turismo acessível obrigatório de 25 horas e, portanto, achamos que deveríamos ir ainda à montante desse target e aí fomos às crianças e desenvolvemos a pandemia prejudicou-nos, porque nós iríamos presencialmente aos locais, mas desenvolvemos aqui também uma ferramenta alternativa que é o PEC Ensino. Desenvolvemos também uma Moodle de formação que está a ser utilizada com grande sucesso também. Investimos muito nas reuniões de trabalho em rede, do trabalho conjunto, a motivação para continuarmos entre várias entidades, entre vários setores, incluindo o terceiro setor, o setor social, que tem muito conhecimento relativamente à deficiência e podem eles próprios também prestar serviços ao setor turístico e comercial e privado. Aqui a nossa grande escola foi a Lausanne e a dinâmica que tivemos com a Arcil, portanto, e tudo aquilo, o que desabrochou de tudo isso, inclusivamente hoje em dia a criação e o trabalho da Ativar nesta matéria. Também criámos um clube de fornecedores para prestarem produtos e serviços de qualidade e adaptados às necessidades dos clientes, um kit multiformato, que eu já vos vou explicar um bocadinho mais à frente, um vídeo de promoção da região, 8 guias, portanto, um de cada comunidade intermunicipal e um global da região centro, a promover todos os recursos de acessibilidade que validámos e as visitas técnicas que efetivamos, e vamos efetivamente promover esse guia de oferta turística. 3 fam trips no território. Devo dizer que neste momento temos The Friends of the Lines of Torres, portanto é uma associação inglesa de turismo militar que está a preparar uma fam trip de turismo militar para nós desenvolvermos, e vai se desenvolver em 3 comunidades intermunicipais, portanto Beiras e Serra da Estrela, com a Almeida, Coimbra com o Bussaco e o Oeste com as linhas de Torres, Sobral de Montagraça e Torres Vedras. E porque nestes projetos também é importante a medição da teoria da mudança com a avaliação de impacto. Dar-vos aqui só um cheirinho das atividades, portanto, estas 449 visitas técnicas estão espalhadas pelo território desta forma. O total são estes números a grande. Os que estão a branco são as visitas técnicas que nós já tínhamos feito no âmbito da Tour for All antes do projeto Access Tour. Portanto, os guias da oferta turística terão esta totalidade, terão mais dos 449, terão perto de 700 recursos turísticos visitados, os do projeto e aqueles que já lá estavam. Aqui o nosso querido projeto dos Guardiões da Inclusão. De facto, o PEC Ensino, que nós não pudemos ir presencialmente desenvolver no território, mas que oferecemos um PEC Ensino a cada município, e já há muitos municípios onde já foram entregues que nos estão a pedir réplicas destes PEC Ensino. O que é o PEC Ensino? É um conjunto de ferramentas que incluem um jogo de tabuleiro e uma web app que eu hoje mesmo vou validar mais perguntas para inserir, portanto, na web app, onde os miúdos, as crianças dos 6 até aos 14 anos, têm por tipologias de ensino básico.
Esse é um problema de som.
Não me está a ouvir? Não me estão a ouvir? Não me ouvem, Elizabeth? Não me conseguem ouvir?
Okay, Anna.
Scott,
Yes.
you can't hear me?
Yes, I can hear you fine. Carry on, please carry on.
Ok. Então, o PEC Ensino continua a ser um desafio, porque nós temos o jogo de tabuleiro, mas temos uma web app que estimula a competição positiva para serem guardiões da inclusão. O jogo de tabuleiro é um jogo que tem peões, todos eles que representam uma tipologia de deficiência, tem cartas da sorte, tem cartas de azar, tem atividades e tem perguntas de verdadeiro ou falso. Os nossos peões representam efetivamente diversos tipos de deficiência, desde as pessoas surdas, as pessoas cegas, pessoas com deficiência física, os séniores e pessoas com mobilidade reduzida. Nós próprios ensaiámos e testámos o jogo e divertimos-nos muito. Dentro das atividades temos inclusivamente a língua gestual, temos o escrever mensagens em braille e divertimos-nos muito e somos adultos e testámos o jogo e foi realmente muito, muito engraçado. Relativamente ao Web App, é uma forma também de colocar as crianças nos dispositivos que elas hoje têm mais atração a fazerem de forma divertida, irem interiorizando alguns conceitos de acessibilidade. As temáticas que estão por trás no primeiro ciclo é aceitar a diversidade, inclusivamente lutar um bocadinho também contra o bullying. No segundo, a acessibilidade e inclusão, mas pôr as crianças a serem quase tutores dos seus pais para que não estacionem o carro nos sítios errados, à semelhança de tudo aquilo que aconteceu com a reciclagem, com a temática da sustentabilidade, pôr os nossos meninos do segundo ciclo a serem tutores dos pais e para serem guardiões da acessibilidade. E no terceiro ciclo, chamando a atenção para que muitos dos acidentes acontecem, que levam à deficiência, acontecem por desvalorizar os perigos, mergulhos mal dado, atravessar a rua a correr como se não houvesse carros, para no fundo serem heróis para os seus pares e o que é efetivamente ser um herói, portanto tudo isso está vertido nesta web app. E depois há um score e há uma competição saudável dentro da própria escola, dentro da própria turma, a nível nacional, estão vários municípios, portanto há todo um back-office que foi trabalhado aqui e que ainda não está pronto, mas que já está em teste e tem tido um sucesso muito grande, até porque os bonecos também são apelativos. Depois aqui o nosso kit de informação multiformato, este também tem sido um desafio muito grande, porque este guia contém uma brochura em escrita simplificada e numa impressão ampliada, a mesma informação em braille e com desenhos bidimensionais, com relevos bidimensionais, a mesma informação em língua gestual portuguesa disponível através de um QR Code, uma placa multiformato também em A4 para se poder perceber que há soluções para transmitir informação que seja acedida através de uma leitura tátil, audiodescrição de uma imagem visual, seja um filme, seja um painel, seja uma obra de arte, seja uma peça, e é gravado num MP3. Depois também muito importante é um guia de leitura tátil, porque nós achamos todos que a pessoa cega vai conseguir, através do relevo, criar a imagem mental sobre aquele material. Por vezes não é assim. Não têm a experiência de leitura tátil de uma matéria que não lhes é conhecida e, portanto, por vezes não é bem assim e é preciso apoio para fazer essa leitura tátil. E depois também um material em escrita pictográfica. Se tivermos tempo, eu no fim passo este guia. Dizer que toda esta informação está disponível, obviamente não é de uma forma digital, não temos o material tátil disponível, mas tudo está no nosso site da Accessible Portugal. Dar-vos uma ideia que todos os 90 municípios terão 90 temas diferentes. Isto para nós é um trabalho hercúleo, é muito grande, e termos que trabalhar com cada um dos municípios uma temática diferente, interagir, eles perceberem o que é a escrita simplificada, a dificuldade de transmitir informação que seja fidedigna, correta, mas de forma sintética, é um trabalho pedagógico que temos que fazer com todos. E vamos desde as termas de São Pedro do Sul, às maçãs de Penalva, à oferta da Idade Média à Idade Moderna de Vozela, enfim, temos uma diversidade muito grande. Aqui dou-vos algumas imagens da brochura de Ilhavo, que tratou do bacalhau. Depois verem que estas imagens foram depois feitas em 2D e em braille. O vídeo em língua gestual, que explica toda aquela temática, e a placa multiformato, no caso aqui tem a igreja, o portal da Igreja da Ruda dos Vinhos, com o projeto ainda antes de ser passado para o 2D e meio, e vejam que tem que haver uma adaptação da imagem visual para nós normovisuais, para que uma pessoa cega tenha os detalhes suficientemente explícitos para que os consiga entender. Aqui já, uma imagem onde se vê um bocadinho melhor os relevos, isto é do Forte de Alcaidão. Para vos dar uma ideia, uma pessoa cega pode visitar o forte, pode experimentar o local, pode sentir uma estrada ainda militar original, mas depois quando lhe é explicado o forte, com uma audiodescrição e com um relevo tátil, consegue ter uma percepção daquilo que nós, normovisuais, ao vermos o forte, conseguimos percepcionar. Portanto, é isto que nós estamos a tentar transmitir aos agentes culturais, turísticos, que há diversas formas de comunicar. A audiodescrição, aqui é um caso de Aveiro, onde uma imagem que é extremamente rica, nós podemos colocá-la através da imagem bidimensional e depois acrescentar-lhe uma audiodescrição que vai permitir que a pessoa cega faça uma leitura tátil e crie uma imagem mental de uma imagem que para nós é visual. O tal guia de leitura tátil, que é de facto importante e que se destina não à pessoa cega, mas à pessoa que está a acompanhar a fruição da pessoa cega. Porquê? Porque no nosso cérebro nós conseguimos, nós normovisuais, passamos do geral para o particular. A pessoa cega passa do particular até conseguir construir o geral. Ou seja, para perceber um carro, ela tem que começar de uma roda, depois passar para a outra roda, e aí já faz o chassi, e depois consegue construir a imagem do carro. Nós não, nós vemos primeiro o carro, e depois vamos ao detalhe. É assim que os cérebros funcionam, e é importante também que nós consigamos transmitir esta informação. Temos uma brochura que explica tudo aquilo que temos dentro do kit. Aqui consegui ter a brochura escrita simplificada em inglês, portanto esta brochura está disponível dentro do kit, no caso do kit está em português. Isto são flyers que estão nos postos de informação turística, fruto de um projeto que a Turismo do Centro fez, mas temos efetivamente o braille, a escrita simplificada, os pictogramas e o QR Code, que permite que qualquer pessoa surda, através do seu telefone, descarregue o QR Code e aceda ao vídeo de língua gestual. A outra atividade que também, portanto, esta é uma das atividades, outra atividade é efetivamente a aplicação IT Tour, que tem o detalhe e recolhe informação sobre a acessibilidade de itinerários turísticos e que depois verte e migra para a Tour for All para se poder ver em detalhe algum hub que esteja dentro daquele itinerário. Aqui muito importante, temos sentido aqui, nós vamos com mais de 300 pessoas a aceder ao e-learning e à Moodle e aos módulos e aos cursos que nós temos desenvolvido. Impressionante, que nós não tínhamos ideia da importância que já sentíamos que a formação e a sensibilização era importante, mas nunca pensámos que houvesse um boom tão grande. Ainda em projeto, nós estamos a ter pedidos de entidades, por exemplo, agora está em curso, a Sara Duarte está a dar uma formação à Fundação Inatel, em que alguns participantes que fazem parte do território Access Tour não estão a pagar, mas temos outros, temos pessoas dos Açores, pessoas do Norte, da Madeira, onde o Inatel está implantado e que estão a cursar foi feita uma turma só para eles e com entusiasmo. Nós temos algum feedback de pessoas que dizem que foi a melhor formação que fizeram na vida. Isto para nós é assim uma surpresa e é muito gratificante. Dura 3 semanas, cada pessoa pode ver e pode fazer, só tem 2 sessões síncronas, portanto pode fazer o curso também em função da sua disponibilidade horária, e são 25 horas, já dão alguma bagagem. Os módulos estão divididos, portanto, num enquadramento geral, temos os clientes ou as pessoas com limitações motoras, visuais, auditivas, intelectuais, os séniores, e temos o trabalho final, que é uma utilização prática da Tour for All, a inserção, a avaliação de um recurso e nas diversas vertentes, portanto, visuais, cognitivas, todas as questões que são tratadas dentro e avaliadas na Tour for All, e depois um recurso turístico avaliado pelo aluno. Temos vídeos com exemplo, com entrevistas, que nos dão também a percepção diferente da pessoa com deficiência positiva, da pessoa com deficiência que ultrapassou barreiras, que tem uma vida como todos nós, que tem anseios, que tem objetivos, que também tem desgostos, tem depressões, tem tudo, como todos nós. Portanto, desconstruir um bocadinho o estereótipo da ideia da pessoa com deficiência, ou uma vítima ou um herói. E depois vídeos também com exemplos de práticas de serviço. A Madalena, que vai ser oradora, portanto aproveitem da parte da tarde a ouvir a Madalena, o Carlos Nogueira, o Augusto, a Marisa, que também vai ser oradora, que é ouvinte e é casada com o André. Depois, nas práticas de serviço, como é que nós colocamos em prática tudo aquilo que é importante a Madalena ter no acolhimento da sua visita e da sua experiência turística, as práticas de serviço, como manusear uma cadeira, como coisas muito simples, mas que as pessoas às vezes até têm medo da cadeira, é impressionante. E depois também aproveitámos os nossos bonecos e fizemos 7 e-books. Portanto, estes e-books ficam todos disponíveis para... estamos neste momento a criar um para o PEC Ensino para os professores, porque também percebemos que há uma vontade enorme dos professores de terem algum conhecimento. Muitos não são professores de educação especial, não é? Mas até auxiliares ou pessoas que substituem outros professores e utilizam o jogo para as aulas e para fazer alguns trabalhos, e estão muito interessados, e nós neste momento estamos a criar um módulo e um e-book para os professores do PEC Ensino, mas este nosso curso tem disponível efetivamente os 7 e-books. E dizer-vos, porque já me estou a alongar um bocadinho, que o Access Tour realmente foi um laboratório para nós, mas que já deu 2 filhos, portanto já teve 2 réplicas desta mesma metodologia no Alentejo Central, que é o Inclusive Tour, e em todo o Algarve. Portanto, estamos a desenvolver esta metodologia, que terminará em 2022, mas aqui o Inclusive Tour e o Algarve for All já vão beneficiar do desenvolvimento e desta investigação aplicada que nós efetivamente já conseguimos fazer no Access Tour. Tínhamos aqui o testemunho do Dr. Pedro Machado, mas eu creio que não temos tempo, e tínhamos o vídeo, pronto, promocional, mas eu creio que também não temos tempo. E pronto, a dizer que somos financiados pelo POISE. Interessante porque a candidatura do Access Tour teve alguns cortes. Quando fizemos 100 consultores, fizemos nós a candidatura do Inclusive Tour e do Algarve for All, nem um cêntimo foi cortado. Portanto, há também da parte do financiador uma satisfação, porque vê que estes projetos têm escala, têm escalabilidade e são muito bons, a nós enriquecem-nos imenso, é uma motivação muito grande continuarmos a desenvolver todas estas ferramentas e ter este feedback, esta adesão dos territórios todos. Agradeço e disponibilizo aqui os meus contactos e pronto, aquilo que quiserem, já sabem que estaremos cá disponíveis.
Muitíssimo obrigada. Muito obrigada, Ana, pela excelente apresentação, pelo projeto fantástico que aqui nos trouxe e que merece a sua divulgação. Vamos certamente olhar para todos estes materiais, mesmo com os nossos alunos, os nossos estudantes. So, thank you very much for this excellent presentation and the great project that you are coordinating. I think it's really impressive what you could do in the past years, and still going on and having fruits also in other territories in Portugal. So let's come now to the next presenter, to the next keynote. Perhaps in the end we can still discuss a little bit more, but as we have limited time, I will now give the stage to Professor Scott Mccabe, who is a professor of marketing and tourism in the Nottingham University Business School. His research has focused on broader aspects of psychology and social psychology of tourist consumer behavior, including emotions, attitudes, choice processes, particularly in pro-social and pro-environment tourist consumption and responsible behavior. He is most interested in the qualities of tourist experiences and how they are designed and marketed. Since 2006, he has been working on a program of research on motivations, experiences, and outcomes of holiday experiences of severely disadvantaged UK consumers. Working with a range of small and large charities, his research has helped to promote the concept of social tourism in the UK, influencing policy and practice, raising public awareness, and establishing a link between holidays and subjective well-being outcomes. His work on social tourism is recognized internationally and has worked alongside European colleagues and beyond to make the case for social inclusion through tourism. He has been a member of the International Sociological Association and is current vice president of the Research Committee on International Tourism. He is also an elected fellow of the International Academy for the Study of Tourism and current co-editor-in-chief of Annals of Tourism Research. Thank you very much for being with us, and the stage is yours.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. I'm sorry to have given you such a long biography. It should have been a lot shorter than that, shouldn't it? I'll share the screen.
It's worth by sharing.
Thanks very much for the invitation to come and participate and present at the conference today online. And I wish I could have been there with you in Portugal rather than here in the freezing cold Derbyshire hillside. And I'm going to share the screen with you and the presentation, and I hope that you'll be able to see that now. Is that working? Yeah. Okay, great. So yes, thanks very much. Hopefully I'll run through this quite briefly and quickly. I would like to present some findings today from a study that we're just concluding, actually, and it's not based on the UK, it's based in Spain. So I'm hoping that it'll be of interest to you within that region, because I know that you have similar senior tourism program in Portugal to the one that is run in Spain. So this is just like to make an acknowledgement that this is funded by the British Academy. It's been delayed by COVID, obviously, for a year and a half or something like that, but we're just about to conclude the study. And so what I'm presenting today are some sort of emergent findings, and I'm working particularly with a couple of economists, and I'm not an economist by background and training. So if they were here, I think that you'd get a much more detailed explanation of the results, but I wanted to give you a little bit of a flavour of those. So the work was undertaken by Professor Antonio Fernandez and David Cisneros at the University of Malaga and the Complutense University in Madrid, respectively, and we work within a team on this project. So the outline of the presentation, really the purpose of the project was to look at how resilient social tourism initiatives and programs can be crises out there. And particularly we were focusing on the global financial crash, but obviously the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, offered us also an alternative, an opportunity to look at this different type of crises, as well as the effects of that longer running financial crisis on the social tourism provision policy, and what is one of probably the most important and biggest social tourism initiatives in Europe. And really it's linked to the issue of economic resilience and prosperity within tourism destinations, particularly those destinations that were developed along the coastline in the Mediterranean in a very sort of urbanized and unplanned fashion in the 1960s and so on, which have become very dependent, highly dependent on tourism. And obviously the link between social tourism and sustainability, particularly economic sustainability, resilience, and also the livelihoods within those destination communities is really important. And social tourism's role to play in that is really could make a massive difference, I think. So we all know the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on international tourism receipts. You know, there's been a huge decrease in the numbers of international tourists, particularly 64% decrease in international tourism receipts. So the economic effects here, a reduction of almost $1 trillion US, and the value of tourism decreased at 4%. And so it's a really, really fundamental and massive shock to the system within tourism. And a really, really interesting report from Unctad recently released, showing that that drop in tourism receipts of $1 trillion actually means a real terms lost in GDP of $2.5 trillion. So there's a 2.5 times effect by the direct spending on the indirect impacts on the economy, and overall a 75% decrease in the number of international arrivals over 2020, and a loss of up to 100 or 120 million jobs at stake. So it's hugely important, the tourism sector. And really, I think that the COVID-19 pandemic has shown us that there's a real need to engage with the tourism industry and at a policy level within different countries to try and determine how we can build back better, how we can recover tourism, and also tourism's role as a fundamental pillar within the economies, particularly within Europe. Very, very important. I put this slides together and lots of words, so I apologize for that. But this is, you know, the UNWTO's roadmap for tourism restart, but we can just take away most of the words and just focus on those key things, really. You know, actually restart should be focusing on the socio-economic impacts on livelihoods of the pandemic and how we can recover from that, the promotion of domestic and regional tourism. And of course, when you hear these things, you immediately think social tourism is a critical role to play there. And also, when we look at the effects of the pandemic, those people who are already economically disadvantaged, or have accessibility needs, or are living in poverty, or on low income groups, or are part of these other target groups of social tourism, we know that they are more disadvantaged by the effects of the pandemic than people in regular society or mainstream society. So we know that there's a big role to play for domestic and regional tourism to help the recovery and resilience. And we also know that social tourism could play a really critical role in helping as a stimulus in driving that recovery in domestic tourism. Okay, so there's also this issue about the environment for micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. I think that that is important because it links to something that I'm going to say later on about the supply sector, excuse me. And also innovation and digital transformation, very critical, I think, what Anna was saying about the the digital innovations that were happening on accessible tourism. Really interesting to see that that's happening because of the way in which digital can help overcome some of the accessibility issues and needs that people have. And of course, the other part of that is fostering sustainability and green growth. You know, sustainability here cuts across not just the environmental pillar, but also the economic pillar and the socio-cultural pillar within destinations and for host communities, as well as for tourists, and the need for coordination and partnerships. And we know, of course, that there's this link to the EU's tourism policy in relation to, you know, maximizing cooperation between European countries. But also, I think that there's a key aspect of this, which is seasonality. And seasonality tends to be overlooked, and the problems of seasonality tend to be overlooked, and particularly in this sort of policy level dialogue about cooperation. But it's one of the key things within the tourism policy at the EU level. You know, the technological solutions, but also security and safety and health is important, but the seasonality issue is fundamental as well. So seasonality is something that we've looked at before with the team in Spain, the economists, particularly looking at the problem of seasonality and how social tourism could potentially be used as a tool to overcome or alleviate some of the problems of seasonality, particularly on the demand side, but also thinking about the way in which seasonality issues have really deep consequences for the labour market within destination resorts and regions, and the sustainability of the employment within those regions. So it's not just about the numbers of jobs and the mix between skilled or unskilled, but it's also about the long-term viability of those jobs, because the links are that if the jobs aren't viable long-term, then that has a vicious circle type of effect on the skills levels of people who are prepared to go into that as a vocation, basically. Then there's the issues about cash flow and investment, and of course, without that long-term sustainability for regions, then there's a reluctance really to invest in upgrading the accommodation and the tourist resources and infrastructure within the destinations and so on. And of course, then there's the operations, the product innovation that can happen. Some of the connects to some of the things that Anna was saying, I think, around product innovation within the context of accessibility, but also within the mainstream market, and also the link between seasonality and pricing, particularly. And we know that some of these resorts are really critically affected by low profit margins, and also that links to the way in which the IMSERSO program operates. It's sort of continually trying to chip away at the profit margins and the amounts that hoteliers can make from the system. That I want to come back to later. So the challenges really: unstable employment, limits on the profitability, mismatches in loading capacities and fluctuation in prices, this real difference between high season prices and low season prices and so on. And potentially also, what we didn't mention is the environmental degradation and the loss of quality of life for local people within destination communities, particularly in peak tourism demand, so where there's sort of over-tourism issues, that can have an effect. And so we know that seasonality, if we can overcome the problems of seasonality, we can smooth out some of the demand flows and some of those peaks and troughs more effectively. And, you know, the European Commission's perspective on social tourism, we know that social tourism can aid mobility, particularly within the off-season, and the ideal, or the idea, is to promote this sort of deseasonalizing effect, and to try and spread the demand a bit more consistently or fluidly over the whole of the period, or over a longer period of the season to provide more longer lasting employment opportunities in the tourism sector. And this sort of links to this sort of connectedness that I've tried to make an argument for in a range of recent publications of social tourism as a sort of welfare model that can be used both to aid the individual, so all of those people that are disadvantaged, the different types of target groups that we deal with within social tourism, in terms of their health and well-being, personal development, education, and also sort of equality of access of opportunity, well-being and quality of life for people who are disadvantaged. Of course, then there's the societal benefits as well. If there's a more equal society, then we can contribute to more social goals of societies within the European region, but also it contributes to things like healthy aging, so that we know that in previous research that we've done in Spain, that people who travel in later life are more likely to be active, more likely to be healthy, more likely to have longer periods of healthy life, whereas people who are less likely to travel or unable to travel are more likely to have greater health needs, and so therefore place a greater burden on social and healthcare costs into the public system. But also it can help sort of equality and social justice goals. But then, of course, then there's the policy initiatives as well. So sort of sustainability and productivity within the tourism industry, and also social and healthcare. As I mentioned, education as well for younger people. I think that Anna mentioned that as well, sort of the educational dimension that can be a real positive for people who are disadvantaged and have different types of access needs, and also destination development. So, we can think about social tourism as a sort of holistic model that can help deliver sustainability across a range of different pillars within the sort of sustainability model. So these might be, the impact on sustainability. The primary goal of many social tourism initiatives is the welfare of individuals, particularly tourists, and reducing inequalities. But the secondary types of motives can be the stimulus to low season travel that can really maintain the economic viability of different destinations. And research in the UK context has shown, over many decades actually, that the coastal resorts that are the focus for much domestic tourism activity in the UK have very, very high levels of deprivation. So we could use social tourism as a great stimulus within these sort of peripheral, urbanized coastal destinations to try and maintain economic viability, particularly where there's a very high level of seasonal concentration. Reduces on inequalities, increasing employment and the quality of jobs, and minimizing degradation in host communities, environmental degradation. And also, as you know yourselves, you've done some research on the Innotel program for seniors, showing that there's been positive effects on local communities, not only just in mitigating seasonality effects, but revitalizing the destination economies and diversifying resort economies. And we did our own research in Spain showing that that social tourism generally can even the flow of demand, although it's variable. So this is what we're looking at now with our current study. So social tourism in Spain through the crises. So these are our emerging findings, if you like. So I just want to start by presenting something a little bit about the context and the problem. Previous research in this area has just focused on the effects on a very sort of limited way, most based in a static point of time, or based on sort of aggregate data for whole countries or regions rather than at the micro level. And we've really got no idea how the programs and the responses to particular types of external events like crises such as the COVID-19 pandemic, but also previously the global financial crash has in its effects on destinations and the economic sustainability model that social tourism is predicated on. So what we aimed to do was to produce an analysis of those effects of the changes in the IMSURSO funding schemes over a period of time from 2007 to 2017 originally, but because of the COVID delay, we've extended it and included a little bit of the analysis on the effects of the COVID-19. And to produce a sort of very fine-grained, localized analysis of the demand for IMSURSO trips within the Spanish coastal regions and provide a better evidence on the concentration effects of the IMSURSO funding scheme and the changes in that scheme over this period of time to be able to provide policy recommendations. And we know that in the Spanish tourism context, tourism is really, really important. 12.5% of GDP, to nearly 3 million jobs, 13% of total employment. Spending in hotels accounted for 32 billion euros, a lot, of which 40% was by domestic travelers. I was in Malaga in September, and rather than seeing so many international travelers there, it was so great to see domestic tourists everywhere lining the streets around Malaga rather than the international market. And we know that the domestic market has really sort of sustained tourism across the EU region. But most, 62% of demand is actualized in coastal regions. So we know the importance of these coastal regions, very, very highly concentrated within the summer months, and some destinations much more so than others. And we used economic analysis. So we looked at monthly occupancy rates, very, very difficult to get hold of this data. So I really need to thank David Cisneros, who was knocking on the doors of the IMSURSO organization, getting this raw data from them and really hassling them for this sort of monthly occupancy statistics, but also the employment statistics as well, and the relative variation between the minimum and the maximum monthly values adds a lot of detail into what we can determine between these links between the demand and the supply and the effects on the employment. So we looked at the demand in terms of the Gini concentration, of the index of monthly data for numbers of travellers and overnight stays. And we also looked at the numbers of hotels participating in the IMSURSO scheme relative to the maximum number of hotels in the destination. And what we did, I say we, but David did it, he used biplots to interpret the relationships between the variables so you can visualize the relationships more clearly, and used hierarchical cluster analysis to group the destinations and then mapped them and then looked at the changes over time. So let's have a look briefly at those emerging findings. So we know that due to the structure and the contracting of the IMSURSO program, the demand generated amongst the market is really largely concentrated in 6 coastal regions of Spain. And for those regions where there's this concentration of IMSURSO activity, the benefits are there basically in terms of this alleviation effect on seasonality and maintaining employment. So we can say that, yeah, social tourism can be used as a stimulus within these 6 coastal regions for combating seasonality effects of tourism demand and maintaining the quality of employment within those regions. But within those 6 destinations, there are great variations. What we found was by looking at this very localized analysis, we were able to see that there are great disparities between the regions. So that the Benidorm and Puerto de la Cruz in the Canary Islands absorb sort of 34% of the hotels with the IMSURSO supply. So, just those 2 absorb almost a third of the demand. And there's a really high degree of heterogeneity within the regions hosting the IMSERSO trip. So the more localized level you get, the more you find that there's a concentration effect in employment and demand within particular sub-regions or tourist spots, if you like, within the regions. And in areas where there's a really high degree of seasonality already and a high proportion of people within those localities employed within the hotel sector, the positive impacts might not be optimally realized. That's a sort of almost contradictory effect, which is quite interesting to note. So here that we can see a couple of visualizations of the numbers of hotels participating in the IMSERSO program in 2019. So this is the latest data that we got. And you can see the concentration effect here within particular regions. And, oh, sorry, lots of graphs here, but let me try and just condense it a little bit. Over the period of time, here we're looking at 2005 right up to 2019. We can see that actually just before the financial crash, there was steady growth. And then 2009, there was a big peak in demand. And then the effects of the financial crash began to be realized, and there was this dip. Okay, there was a dip, there was a cut in the funding to the scheme. The numbers of travelers participating gradually decreased as a result, gradual decline over time. The numbers of participating hotels also gradually declines. The length of stay shortens after particularly after the level of financial contribution from IMSERSO dropped from 30% to 23%. And employment in hotels has never really fully recovered from that drop in financial support, which led to a shortening of the average length of stay and also a reduction in the number of hotels participating in the scheme. So you can see that actually there's been a sort of long-term decline effect from the continual tightening of the funding scheme after the immediate effects of the financial crash on the IMSERSO program, which is really interesting because it really does show that actually what we need in times of crisis is more of a stimulus. And this is what governments did across the world. They put stimulus into the economy, but actually they could have done more for tourism, and they could have done it quicker, particularly once they got a grip on the crisis and once they were able to reopen, particularly within the summer period when the levels of infection were lower, people were mingling outdoors more frequently rather than indoors, and we always knew that in the summer there would be a better chance to control the flow of the virus. But I think that it shows you that actually the stimulus does, or the cut in funding does have a negative effect. So we've got a couple of minutes left, I think, just to show you the types of clusters, cluster analysis that David was able to do. So grouping all of the destinations, you can identify 6 clusters. I asked David if he could just overlay the regional clusters, but it's not possible to do so. So you can see some of the destinations here. Right at the bottom left, I'm pointing here at the bottom left, you can see that Benidorm and Puerto de la Cruz, that's one cluster. They're a very special cluster because they have the largest number of hotels accepting IMSERSO travelers, very high employment ratios in hospitality sector, and also very high concentrations of demand seasonally. So we were able to cluster the regions into similar types, if you like. So clusters 5 and 6 had the highest seasonality indexes, the high levels of IMSERSO supply and high employment in the hotel sector, where other clusters had low to moderate seasonality indexes and so on, and low presence relatively of the IMSERSO sector. of activity. And sorry, this is the change in those movements of those clusters over the period that we were looking at from 2010 to 2019. So 2010 was the year with the highest number of IMSERSO trips, but the subsequent budget cuts showed the paths between the directions between the clusters. But we can see that actually there's relatively little change in the clustering over that period of time, but really that so there was just a few cases where there was a change in the clustering from one period to another as an effect of the crisis. So the changes were gradual over time, and the effects were quite small, but they were gradual over time as well. So the greatest stability occurs where there's a high concentration of the activity, like in Benidorm and so on. So the destinations that showed the greatest changes through the crisis experienced the most significant decreases in the presence of the IMSERSO activity. So just to wrap up in the last minute or so, is that okay, Elizabeth? Are we still okay for time?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Another minute is okay.
Okay, thank you. The IMSERSO programme is highly concentrated within specific regions. It's likely to contribute to lower seasonality effects and long-term employment, so it's worth doing. However, it's linked to the relative importance of the hospitality sector within those regions, and also the seasonal concentration of both demand and supply within the regions. And some destination clusters with low seasonality might not have that much to gain from being involved within the IMSERSO programme. So you can see there's a little bit of self-selection going on within the destinations potentially, but also it helps identify which regions could possibly benefit from greater involvement within the IMSERSO activity. Decreases in funding to the scheme have a small negative effect on employment and seasonal concentration, but the effects have led to a further concentration in supply. So the reduction in funding has reduced the numbers of hotels quite significantly in participating in the programme, and that sort of limits choice for customers as well. So it's something that I think that needs to be taken into consideration by the funders and the policymakers. And in destinations where there's high levels of seasonality and high employment, the IMSERSO activity can be a very, very positive mechanism for those destinations to help continue or contribute to continued viability economically and sustainability. And there's a whole range of policy implications, I think, for social tourism provision, and particularly how it can respond to this post-crisis situation that we're entering into as we try and deal with the third wave and grapple with the consequences and go into the next season next year. So thanks very much for your time and for listening patiently as I quickly went through all of that stuff. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Scott. This was very interesting and very complex presentation with very interesting results from Spain. And it really shows, similar to what is happening also in Portugal with Inatel, that we can do a lot through social tourism programs, not only to help social inclusion of those that are underprivileged to usually have access to tourism, but also it helps the destinations themselves in their economic development and resilience, which is very important these days in crisis, like the pandemic one. So thank you very much for this very interesting sharing of your results. And we now come to our next presenter, my colleague and friend here, Celeste Eusebio, who is associate professor at our Department of Economics, Management, Industrial Engineering at University of Aveiro. And she's also a researcher at GovCorp, and she has been doing research extensively in the last decades, also on social tourism and accessible tourism. She is director, sorry, of our 3 years degree in tourism, has been involved in several research projects, also apart from social and accessible tourism. She's a member also of the editorial committee and review boards of several national and international journals. And she is coordinating the action project that is actually the starting point of this conference. So she will talk to us about co-creation of accessible tourism experiences through web-based intelligent systems. So the stage is yours, Celeste. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So the title of my presentations is Co-creation of Accessible Tourism Experience through Web-based Intelligent Systems. This communication intends to present in a briefly way a research project on accessible tourism that has been developed at the University of Aveiro. Action Project. This is the website of this research project. This project began in July of 2018 and will finish in April of 2022. It is financially supported by national and European funds. Here we have a brief video to introduce the action project. In these communications, I intend to answer the following questions. Why was this research project developed? What are the objectives of this research project? How was this research project carried out? What are the many contributions of this research project in terms of findings? And what do you plan to do in the future concerning accessible tourism? Since 1948, that access of leisure and tourism has been recognized as a right of all people. However, there are many people with specific needs to access tourism activities. According to the World Health Organizations, about 50% of world's population has a disability. It is a growing market due to several factors such as aging population. Moreover, the literature in this area reveals that it is a profitable market. People with disabilities frequently travel in groups for long periods of time in low season, and they are loyal to tourism destinations. There is also a growing concern in your society about equal opportunities and social inclusions. The accessible tourism is a relevant and heterogeneous tourism market. Includes several groups, several segments, such as people with disabilities, people with different types of needs, include also other people with other special needs, and include also seniors. However, the reality in terms of accessibility of tourism supply is not satisfactory. Both the tourism industry and education institution training in tourism have neglected this market. Consequently, people with special needs face several travel constraints. To overcome these travel constraints, accessible tourism emerged as a solution that all people to access independently with equity and dignity tourism products. We can observe a vicious cycle. For example, tourism supply agents and education institutions are not aware of the relevance of accessible tourism market. Consequently, the supply of accessible tourism products is limited, and travel constraints of people with special needs increase. Tourism demand of people with special needs decreases. The challenge is how to break this vicious cycle. In our opinion, this vicious cycle can be broken by involving all stakeholders in the co-creation of accessible tourism experience. This involvement can be facilitated through the development of a web-based intelligent system. In this context, this research project was designed to answer the following research question: how to promote accessible tourism through the co-creations of tourism experience involving all actors through web-based intelligent systems. Thus, the objective of this research project is to develop a prototype of a web-based intelligent system for accessible tourism. To achieve this objective, all the actors of tourism system were involved in this process: people with special needs and their caregivers, tourism supply agents, public and private, and either education institutions. This research project has been developed by a multidisciplinary team from 3 research units. The researchers are experts in complementary areas such as management, economy, sociology, tourism, education, new technologies, and information systems. We have the support of an international consultant and of 3 scholarship holders. 3 PhD students are developing their PhD dissertation in the scope of this research project, and 7 students carried out their master thesis in this area. In this research project, the methodological approach used is an exploratory, participatory approach. Triangulation of perspectives, demand, supply, and education are analyzed. In terms of data collection methods and data analysis methods, a mix of qualitative and quantitative methods was used. Regarding data collection methods, interviews, questionnaires, and focus groups were used. Concerning data analysis methods, content analysis, statistical analysis, automatic evaluation tools of web accessibility were used. To achieve the aims mentioned, 7 tasks were carried out. First, the accessible tourism market in terms of needs, constraints, and tourism experience was analyzed. Simultaneously, tourism supply agents were examined in terms of regulation needs and accessibility level. The Portuguese higher education tourism programs were analyzed in terms of skills in accessible tourism. All the results obtained in the first 3 tasks were analyzed and integrated to identify information users' requirements, specifically to identify the information that each type of user wants to obtain from the platform and the information that each user wants to insert in the platform. In the task 5 was developed the prototype of a web-based intelligence system for accessible tourism market. And we are currently testing this prototype. In terms of findings, a great number and variety of results were obtained in this project. In these presentations, I will show only a summary of these results. In terms of needs, constraints, and travel behavior of people with special needs, based on interviews to people with special needs and social organizations that give support to people with special needs, and on questionnaires to people with special needs with tourism experience and people with special needs without tourism experience, we conclude that people with special needs are strongly motivated. The most important benefits are positive feelings, increased knowledge, and personal development. However, these people face several travel constraints, mostly structural constraints. Difference in motivations, travel behavior, and travel constraints were observed among the segments of accessible tourism market analyzed. Caregivers play an important role in travel planning and travel behavior. In terms of information source used, the internet is the most used information source, specifically to plan tourism trips and to book tourism products. Finally, people with special needs consider the accessibility level of online information source low. Other interesting results are related to the role of social organizations that support people with disabilities in the participation in tourism activities. These organizations have an important role. In some situations, they are the only opportunity for people with special needs to have access to tourism experience. This social organization mainly organize domestic trips, day trips, specifically excursion, cultural visits, holiday camps, and enjoying the beach. They organize these activities because they provide several benefits to the participants. However, the trip planning is a challenge, and this organization faces several constraints, mainly lack of financial resource, lack of human resource, and lack of accessible tourism products. To overcome these constraints, some strategies may be used, such as promote social tourism initiatives and use voluntary initiatives, among others. Some results in terms of accessibility level of tourism supply agents obtained through a questionnaire administered to a sample of Portuguese tourism supply agents revealed that beside the low physical accessibility in some areas, there is a lack of training in accessible tourism of the staff. Staff has no training in inclusive attendance, has little knowledge of the needs of people with special needs, and is not encouraged to carry out training in accessible tourism. Moreover, the majority do not publish information on the level of accessibility of their products and facilities. In terms of web accessibility level of some Portuguese tourism supply agents, in this case located in the central region of Portugal, the results obtained reveal clearly that the web accessibility is low. The majority of websites were classified as irregular practices. However, some differences were observed. For example, the websites of museums present the highest level of web accessibility, while travel agents present the lowest level. Some results obtained in terms of training in accessible tourism in Portuguese higher education tourism programs show that our higher education institutions are not adequately preparing future tourism professionals in this area. Thus, the results obtained from the analysis of the curriculum reveal that no Portuguese higher education tourism programs include accessible tourism in the learning outcomes. Only a small number of Portuguese higher education tourism program has a curricular unit related to accessible tourism. The directors and the views of the students are in line with these results. Thus, according to the results obtained from the questionnaires to directors, despite the majority recognize the relevance of this topic, they mention that training in accessible tourism is mostly carried out in no specific curricular units and in complementary training activities, such as seminaries and workshops. Finally, the results obtained from the questionnaires to students reveal that the students value training in accessible tourism. However, they are not satisfied with the training in accessible tourism obtained during the study program. The majority would like to obtain more training on accessible tourism. Finally, all the actors of an accessible tourism systems involved in this research project were asked about the likelihood of using a web-based intelligent system on accessible tourism. Results reveal a high probability of use. However, some difference can be observed. People with disabilities and their caregivers, the directors of tourism programs, and official organization show a higher probability. On the other hand, the tourism supply agents show the lowest probability. Based on the information obtained and using a user-centered approach, a prototype of a web-based information system was developed. First, to analyze the problem and to identify the requirements, a literature review, including the analysis of some concurrent platforms, the website accessibility was examined, and interviews, questionnaires, and focus groups with users were carried out. The prototype will be tested by experts and users in order to evaluate the content of these platforms, the layout of these platforms, and also the level of usability and accessibility. This is the logo of the prototype developed in the scope of this research project, and this prototype will be presented in the workshop in the beginning of the afternoon. To conclude, we intend to improve the prototype, and also you intend to increase research on accessible tourism in the future. We consider that the journey has only started and it is very long. So, in my opinion, each of us can contribute to a more accessible and inclusive tourism industry. Thank you very much for your attention. Muito obrigada a todos.
Thank you very much, Celeste, for this brilliant overview of a very complex and ambitious project. I think it was very interesting to all of us. And thank you for the final note on all of us having to think about how we can contribute to this very ambitious vision of a more inclusive tourism world. So let's now come to our final presenter, to our final keynote, to Lynn Minert, who is the Academic Director and Clinical Associate Professor at the Jonathan M. Tisch Center of Hospitality at the New York University. Her research has focused on international tourism policy, social tourism, family tourism, the social legacy of events, and corporate philanthropy in tourism and events. Her research has been funded by the Economic and Social Research Council of the UK, the European Union, the International Olympic Committee, regional and national tourist boards, and Meeting Professionals International. She is on the editorial board of Hotel and Tourism Management and on the International Advisory Board for the International Journal of Contemporary Tourism Research. She's also co-president of the International Sociological Association's RC50 Special Interest Group on Tourism and board member of the Northeast chapter of the Travel and Tourism Research Association. The stage is yours. Thank you very much, Lynn, for being with us.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you very much, Celeste, as well, for the kind invitation. And it's great to be back in Europe, even though you can see by the light here, it's very early in the morning in the US. So you'll see the sun, we'll see the sun go up together. And if you're celebrating, happy Thanksgiving to all today as well. I'm going to try and share my deck here. There we go. Hope you can see that. Here we are. So what I thought I would talk about today is my transition going from Europe to the US, which is a whole different environment for tourism research, and particularly for social and inclusive tourism research. I knew coming here that there was going to have to be some changes because I was a typical social tourism researcher. And I say typical, I say the traditional, either government-led or not-for-profit-led social tourism initiatives were my interest. And that doesn't really exist here to any meaningful extent. So coming here, I thought I would have to pivot, and I had to indeed. And I wanted to share with you some of the reasons why, because I think US is known as a no vacation nation. Some people have asked, can you even do meaningful tourism research in the US? And sometimes I think we have stereotypical views of why that might be the case, or maybe incorrect views. So not claiming after 8 years I know all of it, but I know some of it, and I look forward to sharing that with you. So when people call the US a no vacation nation, this is sort of what they refer to, right? You have statistics in the news on a regular basis, like 44% of working Americans didn't take a paid day off in 2020, like not a day off. So where do you even start with social tourism if people are, on the face of it, unwilling to take a day of vacation or a day of paid leave? Well, that statistic hides a couple of factors. I mean, as you'll see in a minute, this is not necessarily a choice for everybody. Of course, in here, there's also people who have their own business who don't have paid days off because they are business owners. So it hides a number of different nuances, but there is also a cultural aspect to this. And I think stereotypically, maybe we'll start there. What people think of with the US is either this, right? America, the land of the plenty. People have a lot of money. People have a lot of things, a lot of stuff. Vacations are probably luxurious when we travel, right? Abroad, we often see American visitors, and they tend to come across as being a very well-equipped group to travel. Another stereotype that you see with the US is this, right? And I can say part of that is definitely true. Whereas in Europe, perhaps we safeguard our vacations, our holiday time a lot more and say, okay, I'm out of the office, I'm not engaging with work. Those boundaries are a lot more blurred in the US. So I have indeed seen people, not maybe for kidney surgery, that they would put an out of office reply, but I've seen out of office replies for an afternoon, which is perhaps not necessary. So it shows this whole different attitude towards work and what it means to be a responsible, contributing member of your place of employment. And so between those two factors is usually where people see the US sitting. Like, people have a lot of money, but they don't value vacations, they don't take time off because they're so focused on the material things and on making more cash. And I think that is probably a bit one-sided as well, even though there's some truth to that. So is the US really a no vacation nation? That is something that I grappled with a bit in the beginning, because on the face of it, yes. On the other hand, it's a big and complex country with lots of different people in it in different circumstances. And when you step out and maybe look at it on a global level, we have students from all over the world, and this was a wonderful excuse for me to show you a picture of my students. Some of our Asian students say that the work culture in the US is nothing compared to what they're used to. They're used to what they call 996, working from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m., 6 days a week, very limited time off. If you get time off, it's during national vacation days, when everyone's traveling and it's difficult to get around. So they find work culture not at all threatening. And if anything, want to move here because the work culture is milder. Of course, when you compare it to some of mainland Europe, the work culture here is more demanding. So where does that truth lie? And I think we can start thinking about it here, right? I think this is such a, to some extent, little known fact. Like, when you think about how many vacation days, paid vacation days, are mandatory in each country, I ask my students, how many do you think employers need to give you legally in the US? And they'll say, maybe 10, maybe 15. They know it's probably not like in some countries in Europe where it's 25, 28 days, but they think, okay, it's a fair number of vacation days. And as you see here on the graph, actually the US is the only advanced nation where your employer has to give you no vacation days at all, no paid vacation days if they don't want to, which is, I think, for many people a shocking fact. And of course, it doesn't mean that people on the whole don't get vacation days. The majority of us do. In case you're wondering, I do. I get paid vacation days. But there is a substantial group in the population that doesn't. And because, if you don't get paid vacation days, where do you even start with inclusive tourism? Particularly if you think about the fact that, this group is not negligible. It's 23% of the population, so roughly a quarter, that don't get paid vacation days. And 22% don't even get paid holidays. With holidays here, you mean bank holidays, like today, Thanksgiving, right? A lot of us get that as a paid day off. Some people will, you don't work, they don't get the holiday paid. There's not even paid maternity leave that is mandated. You might have heard about Biden's Build Back Better plan and the social safety net he's trying to build. This is an enormous sticking point, right? Should people get paid time off when they have a child? I mean, depending on where you are in the world, I think that answer is very, emphatically yes, but in some states here, that is a big sticking point. And that disproportionately affects the low income and the part-time workers. A lot of the workers, for example, in 0-hour contracts in very small businesses, that are very small businesses here, micro businesses are very under-regulated. I mean, if you only have 3 employees, the state doesn't get involved too much with, what kind of benefits you offer. So those groups who are paid less, who probably don't have reliable hours, now also do not get paid vacation time, which is why inclusive tourism here is such a struggle. On the other hand, on average, though, people get 10 paid vacation days, which hides enormous differences, as you can imagine, from 0 to some people who get probably 25 to 30 vacation days. On average is 10, and most people, as you will see, 78% do get paid national holidays. So that's another 11 days, 21 days, we can say on average, what people have as vacation time. So already there, if we step back on why are people not traveling in the US, it's not necessarily just this image of high time barrier, right? I'm so busy with my job, or I don't feel I can take time off with my job because I'm a work martyr and I'll give everything up for my work. And low income barrier, right? This idea that everyone in the US has plenty money. That's one group of people that doesn't participate in tourism too much. But there's this whole other group of people, right, who have a high income barrier, the people that in Europe I would have always focused on in my research, people who struggle maybe to afford a breakaway, a week away. And their time barrier can be either high or low. Like if you're unemployed, yes, you have a low time barrier. You have plenty of time to engage in vacation time. But your time barrier might actually be high because if you're only paid for the hours you're actually working, then taking a day off actually costs you, right? In the bottom line, you're going to be paid less in your next paycheck. So the time barrier, in a sense, might be high because people might be under a lot of pressure to work enough hours to be able to afford, their regular expenses. Oh. And so every year we do a family travel survey here with the Family Travel Association. And about 2 years ago, before the pandemic, we asked about that specifically. Like, are you taking your vacation days? And if so, why do you, why don't you? And I think these kind of responses are very telling about, the nuances of what happens in this country. So in the grayish bubble, you see that sometimes one person, right, in the couple gets vacation days, the other person doesn't. Although I get vacation leave with my job, my husband does not. So he loses time and money by missing work to go on vacation. Now that's a challenge because, of course, most couples, families want to travel together. I think the brown bubble sums it up very well. My time doesn't always coincide with my income level. When I have money, my time isn't available and vice versa. In other words, if I work, I have money, but if I have to take time off, I don't have money. So now I cannot participate fully in travel. And then in the orange bubble, again, this was a few years ago. I don't know if people would say now the economy is so bad, but at that time, the person said the economy is so bad, I cannot risk my job security by taking any time off work. And I think it's kind of tragic to think that this person uses their vacation time only when, for example, there's too much snow on the road and they can't physically get to work. Or other people said, I have to save up my vacation days if, for example, I'm sick or my children are sick. Then this idea as well that there's not the employment protection that perhaps as a European audience we're used to. So you are more vulnerable, particularly if you're on 0-hour contracts, that you might not be, kept on, that you might lose your job. And so if we see that, many people who do get vacation days don't always take them all, that is what's happening, right, as part of that too. It's not just that people don't appreciate or value vacations. I think the appreciation is different with Europe, granted, but it's not quite as black and white as that. Because if you look here, you can see a real trend and a difference in how many vacation days people used to take versus now. So if you look in the 1970s, 1980s, actually people took way more vacation. If we said on average 21 days, well, they took roughly 21 days in 1981, a time when perhaps labor protections were stronger, union representation was stronger. And then you sort of see the amount of vacation days trail off until 2008, a steady decline, but still in 2010, there's about 18.1 days. But then in the wake of the financial crisis, so in the recovery period of that, interestingly, people lost a lot of labor protections. When people were able to get jobs again, and when the economy was recovering, they were willing to sacrifice a lot of time for job security in the wake of what had just happened. And you see a steep drop, right, all the way down to about 15 days, only 15 days a year that people would take. And then it gently nudges up again, luckily, up to 17 days in 2018, the last time this survey was done. But that wasn't necessarily a coincidence. The US Travel Association did a big push, did a real campaign about this issue, trying to get people to take their vacation days, which I think is so telling. I'm from Belgium. None of my friends, family, you wouldn't have to push them to take their vacation days. It is something that is ingrained in the culture. You get, my sister probably gets around 28 days. She'll take all 28. Or if she can't take them in 1 year, she'll make sure they're all over. Here, it's a slightly different attitude. So the project that the US Travel Association initiated was called Project Time Off. It ran for about 2 years. Interestingly, then funding was cut by the Trump administration. What they tried to do is really show people that if you take time off, this will benefit you in other areas of your life. For example, your relationship, your personal financial situation, and your professional success, which is very interesting that you would have to prove it to people or highlight it to people. To some extent, of course, this was also signaling to employers, like you need to not just make your employees comfortable about taking time off, you probably also need to encourage them to take all of their days off. So this was both towards the employee and the employer, a signal to try and change the attitude of the work martyrdom. And so these some of examples of what the social media campaign was all about. You see the images at the top, they're very much aimed at the employees themselves, trying to show that, someday, this waiting for someday going on vacation, that might not necessarily work out. You need to plan your vacation now. Even comparing us to electronics, that we need to unplug a few minutes and then we will work better again. Again, very interesting approach to this kind of idea of why someone would need a vacation, so that it makes you more productive afterwards. And then also to policymakers, see that one at the bottom, I know there's a little bit more text there, but the idea of that graph was that if people took their days off, actually they would spend a lot more, and that would benefit the economy and that would result in more jobs. So this whole, the stereotype that this is a more materialistic and money-driven society, I would say it's true, but it's not the only aspect to this question. And I'm hoping the sound will work, but I wanted to show you this. This was a ad at the time, a commercial for a credit card company, and you will see that they tied in with this message, trying to increase spending by taking vacation days.
We've heard that over 400 million vacation days go unused every year.
That's the stupidest thing I ever heard.
They're paid vacation days.
If you guys agree to travel more, we'll all do better in school.
We'll have a better understanding of other cultures. I will learn to parler français.
Oui, oui.
We're not asking for much. We just want one more day.
One more day.
For help planning your one more day, contact MasterCard Concierge Services or download our new app.
Because one more day is priceless.
Yeah, I really love that commercial. I think it's a very interesting way to tie your product to a sentiment that was just about building at that time. And of course, using the kids is a great way to get at the parents and to get them to change their behavior, which ties into something that I wanted to come to next. In our research about family travel, particularly in the US, we see that there's sort of three broad groups in society or in travel demand. And I'm not claiming that these are particularly different from other countries around the world, but I am thinking that perhaps the distribution between the three is a little different. So the first group, the first profile of traveler is the cautious traveler. Think of a family who is interested in exploring different types of vacation products, tourism products, who want to, but who worry a lot about whether it will be what they signed up for, whether it'll be as nice as the photos, whether there'll be enough to do for the kids, whether it'll be safe and hygienic. And they're just concerned about a lot of these things. And because of that, sometimes they limit themselves to only certain options. So that's group number one. They love planning, they love researching, but they're just a little worried about making final decisions. Then you have the hassle-free group. They, in contrast with the cautious group, do not like to do a lot of research. They just want to buy a tourism product off the shelf and go. So that could be, say, a cruise or a resort vacation, something that you put the money down, they're willing to put a lot of money down, and you just relax. And the whole point of vacations is not to get wrapped up in planning and worry. And then you have the intrepid group. As the name suggests, these are the routine travelers, people who are used to the travel, environment, who take their children on, exotic vacations, on active city breaks out in nature, who aren't necessarily concerned about doing the planning. Like the cautious group, they really like doing the planning, but they aren't so worried about what the outcome is going to be. And you might say, well, you have that everywhere. That's true, but it does have a certain implication that I think is quite typical for the US here, is that cautious group is by far the largest in family travel types. And I think from the outside, people would expect the hassle-free group to be the largest when you think about American travelers. But no, there's the cautious group that's the biggest. And when you think about it from everything that we've been saying so far, it makes perfect sense, right? You have very limited vacation days available. You have limited days among those vacation days that you will actually travel. So now this precious vacation time, it's not something that you gamble with. It's not something that you take a chance on. That is why people are so cautious when they book. And the result is that very often people will be drawn to the safe bets. So for example, Disney or theme parks or resorts. And then, sometimes you see European commentators go like, oh, Americans have no imagination. They don't value like the broad variety of travel experiences that the world has to offer. I don't think it's necessarily always that. I think people would love to take their children to France, but you don't necessarily want to gamble having a bad experience if you only have that very limited time to do it. One final point I wanted to highlight, and I think it's a positive one. I think it's one that I'm at least very excited about. The Great Resignation, right? This whole idea of people changing jobs, leaving their jobs in droves. It is definitely a phenomenon here. Even the university where I work, I think we're about 20% down in our workforce. So definitely can guarantee that it's real. From what I hear in the UK, it's starting to. So what it means, if you're not familiar with the term, is in April of this year, the highest number of people ever in the recorded history apparently changed or quit their jobs. And then that record was broken again in August, and the record was broken again in September. So people are leaving their jobs in droves and are rethinking what they want from work. And I think for tourism, it's actually not just for tourism, it's a positive thing. So this is the kind of thing you would see a lot on the internet now, on social media. A lot of the time people equate the Great Resignation to just young people. It's not just young people. I think there's this collective realization in the US that this is a system that is stacked against a worker because there's so few protections, right? Because there is no safety net. And as a worker, you're always on the back foot compared to your employer. which, you know, for some of you might be like, yes, sure, why didn't they realize that before? Well, it's this collective realization now in large numbers that is taking place that is quite interesting to see. So why are people quitting? Depending on which publication you read, there's a lot of different explanations, and I think they all probably play a role. The economic stimulus during the pandemic, both under Trump and under Biden, definitely played a role to some extent. People got stimulus checks, sometimes several thousands of dollars. I think at the same time, that it's not the only reason. Say, for example, with your family, you've received $7,000 in a payment. That is very nice, but it's not going to carry you for months and months if you quit your job in April. So there must be more going on than just the economic stimulus. Lack of reliable childcare is a big one. So with the pandemic, schools have been closed. And again, now the numbers are going up again in terms of infections. Schools are closing. There's a lack of school bus drivers, so people can't get to school. Families have to be at the ready to go get their children if the school system doesn't provide childcare. So this lack of reliable childcare has taken a lot of mothers out of the workforce. And a lot of people also took early retirement at the start of the pandemic. When they were offered, they decided to retire, and they're not necessarily coming back. But then this idea of the precarious working conditions, right? The people who were there throughout the pandemic in retail and food service, who had to deal with the public, who had to fight over mask mandates, who, you know, probably aren't paid very well, aren't getting any benefits, or if they get benefits, very poor benefits. A lot of them are now no longer willing to accept that kind of working condition because they can do better elsewhere. As I said, hourly positions, there's a lot of hourly positions here. Even, for example, my husband's a sommelier, like part of the management team in a restaurant. It's an hourly position with no benefits. So if I didn't have healthcare via my job, I don't know how necessarily he would be able to afford it on the salary he makes. I mean, in case you're interested, I mean, I pay around $500 a month healthcare for our family, but my employer pays around $2,000. So if you have to pay $2,500 in healthcare every month, that is a chunk of change, as they would say here. Even on the white collar side, so people who have jobs that are not hourly and that do offer benefits, wage stagnation has been a problem, and it hasn't kept up with student loan debt. So people are looking to be paid more and have a more flexible job. And I think that's the underlying message. Like, it's not just all these, it's not just the benefits, it's not just the money. The values have changed, and how your employer treats you is more important now. So for example, these are some of the changes in the workplace we're seeing. Minimum wage is increasing to $15 an hour, which is frankly still not all that much depending where you live in the country. But workers are demanding flexibility and work from home. I mean, just this morning, the headline on LinkedIn was that even Wall Street, which is probably the most traditional part, you know, the financial industry, most traditional part of the workforce here, even their workers want to work from home and do not want to come back 5 days a week to the office. So people want more balance. They want to live a bit more and work maybe a little less, which is not necessarily a bad thing. And how do you see that in the travel sector? Well, and again, some of these impacts have been quite good, I think, at least in the long term. I'm not saying that there hasn't been a lot of hurt and difficulty in the travel sector, and a lot of our alumni lost their jobs and it was a traumatic time. I'm not saying at all that it was overall a good thing, but some good things might be coming out of it. So for example, business travel, all the way down in terms of demand, which has made the travel industry focus more on leisure and focus more on families, which is interesting because until very recently, it was difficult to even get 2 connecting rooms in a hotel in the United States, which is mind-blowing, right? We have technology for all kinds of things, but we can't book 2 connecting rooms for a family that wants to travel together. Why? Not because it wasn't doable. It was because the travel industry just didn't care enough. They didn't see it as big a priority. And now it is. Also, the national parks have had one of their best years in history of visitation. So people are changing perhaps from the safe bets, right? Like the resorts, the theme parks, which are associated with crowds. You might not feel safe at this time to go there. You see that people are more interested in new and different types of experiences. You see it in Airbnb. Like Airbnb now has a function, you might have seen it, where it says, I'm flexible. You suggest where I should go. So no longer are we just in the US going to San Francisco and New York and New Orleans. People are straying a little bit more off the beaten track. So the safe bets, it's broadening. And I think once you open that door, you don't necessarily go back. And we also see a lot of demand for intergenerational travel, multi-generational travel, which I think will be highlighting that you don't necessarily need the luxury resort all the time. You just need quality time together. Again, it might sound like a very obvious thing, but here that wasn't necessarily emphasized. So to wrap all that up, there is some progress, but if you look at it from a European perspective, there's still very stark differences. And if you ask me, do you think there's going to be social tourism in the US like we know it in Europe anytime soon? I'd say no, absolutely not. We're still very far removed from that. There's definitely impetus for change. People want difference. And now that the workers have more power, I think we will see the pendulum shift a little bit towards better conditions and a better social safety net. But it's in an incredibly uncertain context. I'm sure that you follow the news as well about the Build Back Better plan. It is accepted on the infrastructure side, the roads and the bridges, and everyone's on board with that. But once it comes to the social provisions, like, for example, paid maternity leave and childcare, there is no consensus in this country that is something that the state should provide and that everybody should have access to in the same way. There's definitely more of an attitude of you got to work harder so you can afford it, particularly in some states. So I hope that was to some extent interesting. I hope that this view from across the pond was enjoyable. And I think, Elizabeth, we're going to take questions after, right?
Right. Thank you so much, Lynn. This was actually very interesting and a bit, astonishing to some degree presentation. Well, where does social tourism cut in a place where there is perhaps not a welfare state and you have so much to do still? Very interesting. Thank you so much for this presentation. So I think we should now get directly to the questions because we are a bit delayed in time. And I would suggest that those who have been attending through our streaming, they could present their questions. I have already one that I noted here for Scott, I think. But you are please asked to introduce any additional questions in the chat. But I will start now with the first question by Celso Brito, who asks about, the impact of social tourism on quality of life of those who travel, who participate in these social tourism programs. And he asked if there is any indicator that can be used and if you have worked with an indicator that you could suggest.
Quality of life for travellers, the impact of that. We've done a little bit in the past. We used the World Health Organization, QOL, it's HUQOL brief. Actually, it was the brief measures. There are actually loads and loads of quality of life measures out there. We followed that up and looked at subjective well-being in more detail as a range of measures, because actually quality of life just measures satisfaction with different elements and domains of life, which is quite important, but it misses some of the more social and developmental aspects of well-being that might arise out of holiday trips. And the work that we've done previously has identified that those are really important. The benefits to people in terms of, bonds and relationships amongst the groups, the family groups, were an important outcome. and the quality of life indicators didn't really adequately capture all of that, whereas some of the more some of those scales that were developed within positive psychology that look at the sort of social and relational aspects of well-being were sort of gave a better picture. So there are a range of different measures and scales out there that you can use. My advice would be not to just focus on the quality of life indicators, but yeah, I'd be happy if you sent me an email to discuss some of those. A paper that I published with Sarah Johnson in Annals of Tourism Research in 2013 gives an overview of the differences between the quality of life indicators, the subjective well-being, and the ones that have just related to positive and negative effect, the emotional side of things.
Well,
okay?
Thank you very much. So whoever is interested in that topic can send perhaps me an email and I forward it to you. Yeah?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
No problem at all. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that availability for collaboration. I see now, yeah, anything else? No? I see I have another question here now for Professor Minert, for Lynn. No, it was for Professor Celeste. It was a congratulation to Lynn for this very excellent presentation. And for Celeste, we have the question. We know that tourism is not only economic activity, but from a supply perspective, is accessible tourism economically feasible, viable? What is your understanding of this? Do we have any data?
Yes, in my opinion, yes, and the data support this conclusion because the majority of people with special needs travel accompanied with friends, relatives. The length of stay is higher than the people without disabilities, and they travel in low season. So it is a very, very important tourism market for tourism supply, and it is a profitable tourism market. I think that is a myth. In the majority of cases, the people think that people with disability or people with other special needs, it's a small market. It's not a small market, it's a great market, and include also senior populations. And we assist at this moment aging population. So it is a very, very important growing tourism market.
Yes, thank you. And I also recall from our research that it is a particularly loyal market too.
Yes.
Yeah, as soon as they are pleased with what they get, as they sometimes have big difficulties in getting to really accessible places, they are very happy, and then they are quite loyal and also have a very positive word of mouth recommendation behavior, which is very positive. Well, I think that these questions that are directed to one person or the other, some of them are broader, and you might all have a word on that, also from your own research perspective. So about this feasibility and potential barrier that some supply agents perceive of low profitability, I think there are some evidence that shows that it's not like this.
Yes. But I think that Anna can say something about this because she carried out a lot of research in this field. So,
yeah. Well, yes, I agree with all of your perspectives, and I can enhance that several studies, scientific studies, can prove that, in fact, because of aging, accessible tourism is nowadays mandatory. It is not an option because you have an holistic perspective in all the chain of touristic stakeholders. So it is not an option, it is mandatory, because in a few years you won't have a lot of clients without specific needs of access. And tourists are more informed, and they make their options in fields that are accessible, because it is more safe, it is more reliable. So I don't think it's an option, and it is not a niche. It is all of the market because of the aging population. Because there is a very interesting study from 2011 that across aging, the Organization of Health and OMT, the United Nations of Tourism Organization, and they cross their figures and their data, and it is very, very important market because when you grow up now, but when you become older, you have needs that are not from the disability, but are natural from your aging process. So you walk worse, you see worse, you need support and services that are very close to the service of accessible tourism. So it's more safe, it's more comfort, and with more dignity also, because if the tourism suppliers understand the needs of the clients, even I'm not talking about intellectual disability, but if you understand that the senior is focused on his routine, when he arrives in a different place, he maybe don't remember where is the bathroom, or where is the restaurant, or at what time is the breakfast, and it is not because he's with a disability, but it is natural in his process of aging. So if we understand our natural diversity and our natural diverse functionality, we are able to get all our clients, independent on the stage of the life they are, and independent if they have or not a disability. So the scope is much bigger, you know.
Yeah, I agree totally. We are in a changing framework right now, in which it becomes really quite obvious to those who are more sensitive about the issue, and to see also the opportunities, the economic opportunities related to senior tourism. So we must adapt to the market, and actually it's a very basic principle of marketing. And now here I have a question by Joanna Alves, who asked Professor Minert, Lynn, you spoke about the resistance of the tourism offer in the US in creating something as simple as a room with access for families. So how do you think is the acceptance of tourism suppliers to accessibility conditions to persons with disabilities? Is this an issue in the US?
Well, yes and no. I think in one way, yes, absolutely. And in the other way, there's some suppliers that are really very far advanced and actually could act as a model for global, I think, organizations. First of all, the whole thing with families, right? The fact that you can't have the two rooms connected, the fact that people can't sit next to one another on airplanes, that has nothing to do with people not being able to, or technology not being able to. It's all about the upsell. So yes, you can sit together with your family, but your airline is going to charge you and maybe $30 extra 4 times. So now you're $120 more out of pocket. It was a question of values, not of being able to. However, the one thing that American society is really good at is trying to create value, create profit from groups that, as Anna was saying and Celeste was saying, are actually much larger than people give them credit for. So if you look at Disney, for example, right, from the parks to the cruises to the experiences, they're excellent with accessibility in terms of any type of, you know, whether it is an access need, a mobility need, or whether it has to do with, say, autism or children with developmental needs. They're an example, I think, to many providers. And so are the cruise lines to some extent. For all the negative things we say about cruise lines, their whole product is very accessible, particularly for people with mobility needs. And there's special sailings for children with autism, for example. So I think the US will be slower in doing it for the greater good, but will be quicker, like what the point Anna and Celeste were making, to see the profit incentive and try to act on that. So yeah, as always, not black and white.
Yeah, thank you. Very different reality from Europe. Although, of course, we have the profit move, of course, but I think we have much more also a kind of concern, a social concern, and we have funding, fortunately available, also European funding. What is the situation in the UK, Scott? Can you perhaps comment on that? Regarding all the support that is given also by government entities on social tourism and accessibility in tourism.
Yeah, I think the two things are separate, because there's funding available to help support accessibility. And obviously we followed the European Union in terms of the Disability Discrimination Act. And I think that a lot of businesses across the sector are working really hard actually to try and adapt and also and they're able to access some funding to help them adapt, to put in place adaptations. Now, to the extent to that is really, you know, successful and realized, and that people with various impairments or disabilities might feel able to access a full range of experiences is different across the country, I think. And also I think that there's the market incentive is also there. There are some businesses which are very aware of the fact that they can extract better value from focusing on particular types of groups of people with characteristics or needs that they can attract, and that's very helpful. I think that there's a lot of competition in the UK tourism market, and it's a very, very advanced level of activity. They have a great awareness and understanding of what's happening. And Visit England has got a range of great policies and support available to encourage accessibility. And but what's not been covered so much is the way that the sort of external environment, there's a cultural shift, I think, taking place in relation to people's characteristics and the way in which we think about people and equality issues that includes sort of diversity, inclusivity types of issues, but also stretches across accessibility for people with disabilities. And I'm thinking particularly in terms of where there are hidden types of disabilities, such as like neurodivergence, or people that might have that might be difficult to identify where people have got sort of impairments. But you know, all of that accessibility debate stuff is happening, and I think there's, you know, great awareness of that. But that's separate from social tourism in a sort of broader sense, because there's no public funding available for social tourism. All of the activity basically comes through charitable funding streams. And also I think that there is an awareness, though, a greater awareness that in the regional governments within the UK, so the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Parliament, there's a recognition and an investment in social tourism beginning to emerge. But that's not happening in England or from the UK government perspective. So there's sort of a great difference, really. But still, I think whatever funding is available via Wales or Scotland or Northern Ireland, I think that that's relatively small scale, but it is beginning to happen. But there's a big difference really between social tourism more generally and accessibility requirements. That's partly driven from legislation, but also partly driven by a need to understand and recognize equality issues across society, and amongst the industry, that they do have to adapt and recognize that there are people out there with a very wide range of different needs and potential for different types of experiences as well that they could tap into in terms of generating extra profits.
Yeah, thank you. And perhaps also recognizing the important role that such offers, more accessible, and also social tourism offers and programs that are funded publicly, the help that this could mean, the contribution for economic development in the regions, considering particularly seasonality, as you looked at, the multiplier effect that we have regionally, and that can be actually helping these regions to develop their tourism and economy further. And perhaps this is one of the big arguments why in Portugal and in Spain you do have these public funded projects, because actually it helps the industry survive in times of seasonality. Isn't it like that, Celeste, that we have found this also for Inatel in Portugal? Very similar to Inserso in Spain.
Yes, but in Portugal, the reality at this moment is a little different. There is a decrease in the public fund to social initiatives. Before, there are more support of public funds to carry out social initiatives. It's, in my opinion, a problem, because I think that social tourism is very, very important, and it is a way to provide opportunities to people without financial resource to participate in tourism activities and to benefit of the tourism in terms of quality of life and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and how about the future? Perhaps you could all say a little bit about what do you think is the future of social inclusive tourism from your perspective, in your context in which you work and research? Perhaps we start with Anna.
Well, it's not very easy for me to answer that, because we don't do research on that. We have the field, we have opinions, so it's very different. It's not scientific information.
Yeah, but perhaps you can have some intuition regarding the evolution. Do you think it is heading into a positive future, or do you think that the barriers are becoming more evident?
Well, we are in a different situation nowadays because of COVID and all this environment. But I feel that even for a question of sustainability, we have to grow on this way. People have to have access to culture, to visit other regions, even national tourists. So the importance of this movement, if you want, is extremely important, because if you don't have opportunities, you get depressed, you don't see others, you don't, and it is related to the sustainability of territories, because if you increase this way of sea life, you have also more turnover in the tourism sector. So even you have some resources that don't live with external tourists, but internal tourists are very important, and even visitants that don't sleep in the territory, but who buy things, who eat in the restaurants, and who pay the tickets in the museum, well, and give some how can I say it in English? Well, shake.
Em português. Vamos tentar a tradução. Sim?
Sim, movimentam os territórios, trazem vida aos territórios. E é muito importante isso, não é?
Yeah. All this dynamization. And you have the impression that there is an increasing interest in the topic.
Of motivation, yes. And I believe it's very, very important, even for the sustainability of the territories and the resources and the stores and the stakeholders, the hotels, the restaurants, and even the museums. But I don't see, because we are acting in a crisis. So in this moment, I don't feel a lot of preoccupations, and I became preoccupied with the tourism sector. I feel some preoccupations with the big stakeholders, big hotels, big resorts, because of course they are in a difficult situation, but I don't see a lot of measures, and I am talking about the future framework that we are now discussing, and I don't see a lot of measures to increase the access to tourism sector, and I'm a little ashamed.
You are concerned that in times of tighter budgets, the accessibility and social tourism movement
I don't see a lot of things. No,
will lose.
And we have a very interesting impact of when you qualify a destination for visitors with access needs. You qualify the territory for the people who live there every day. So, but unfortunately, I'm not very, very enthusiastic with the next framework and the support to this kind of activities in tourism sector. Perhaps it can change, but it's my feeling, and I have a look in the propositions for the next framework, and I don't see, even for tourism in general, it is not very, very helpful, and it is not. I don't know. I know that Tourism of Portugal, the National Tourism Organization and the National Authority, I know that they are concerned about that, but we have another entity, the CCDR, that are commissions that coordinate the territories, and they don't put tourism sector and of course social tourism in the framework. So I'm a bit concerned about that.
I'm not so sure. We're working on that. We are working on pods, yeah. So perhaps we have some suggestions to make here. Well, Scott, what is your perspective for the next future, given the conditions that we are in right now, and also from your research experience?
Elizabeth, I wish I could say that we had the same level of potential or access to changing policy in the UK as you might enjoy over there in Portugal. And I think that that's probably something to do with the difference between, you know, the importance of tourism as an economic plank of or pillar within Portugal as it is here in the UK. But I think that we're at a unique moment. I think there's a unique opportunity, because if there's one thing that the pandemic has shown, it has really demonstrated to policymakers it's put hospitality and tourism right centre and forefront in the minds of policymakers here in the UK, and they sort of understand and get the fact that we do need a very vibrant tourism sector, and that without a tourism sector, all sorts of other things related to the cultural and creative industries are not viable, really. And particularly with hospitality, you know, food and drink and attractions and venues and events and all of these things become really, really problematic without a really strong and vibrant tourism sector. So that's a great opportunity that we've got to actually influence policymakers. But what I'm share Anna's concerns, because what I don't see really in any of the policy measures that the government introduced around supporting the hospitality sector, in giving tax breaks to the tourism industry during the pandemic to help get them through. There was nothing about equality of opportunity of access in any of that. So, you know, if you've got the money and you can participate, then there's lots of pent-up demand, then it was great, you know, because you could access all of this stuff that was available, you know, the cheaper hospitality, and if you were quick and you had the technology and the finance available, you could book a holiday, domestic holiday. But there was far too much demand for the supply and the domestic system last year, and it makes it very, very difficult then to implement you know, equality of access and opportunities for equality for everybody to access opportunities than it was previously, probably, when there was much more international demand, which we didn't have. So I'm share those concerns that Anna's has really, but at the same time, I do think that we have got a couple of things as well, is that ordinary members of society realize how important it is to get out there and enjoy tourism. We love being able to travel and experience the world, and we've got a much better sense really of how it benefits us. So, you know, at a societal level and also a policy level, I think that we've got lots of opportunities, but I do worry really that we're not maybe being able to make the case as forcefully as we possibly could for greater, you know, stimulus into social tourism ongoing, particularly within the UK context.
Yeah, thank you for this opinion and your view on the future. And well, Lynn, you are starting at a lower point of development, even in comparison to Europe here in the US that you look at. But what is your perspective on the future of also social and accessible tourism in the US?
Well, here it'll be baby steps, right, Elizabeth, as you say. And I'm optimistic with his great resignation. I really am. And a lot of the people on our advisory board will probably hate me for saying it because they don't like their employees leaving the hotels and stuff. But there is finally an awakening that life is about more than just work and money. And that is where you have to start from with any kind of tourism policy, right? There's a long way to go. Are we ever going to reach what Europe has here in the US? Frankly, I don't think so. But when I look at my home country, at Belgium, there, you know, the Flemish Tourism Board, they have been able to maintain their funding. I think part of that is because they have a director who is superb and who keeps social tourism at the forefront of the policy agenda constantly, right? I mean, when she first started to shift her view from just providing a service to also talking about its storytelling, people thought, you know, what are you doing? But the whole reason for that is, like Anna was saying, like, if you don't keep it at forefront of people's minds, it's very easy for that part of policy to be cut out. And I think, you know, we could all take a page out of her book, like by keeping on about it. She has been able to withstand a couple of minister changes and threaten budget cuts, and I don't think it'll ever be easy, because as long as I've known Scott, which is now a couple years, I'd like to think that we've always talked, Scott, about budgets are being reduced, pressure on public funding. It's always going to be there. So we just have to keep fighting to keep it forefront of people's minds.
Yeah, that's a that's a good point. Keep it in our mind. So communicate about it, research about it, study it, discuss it also in class. Celeste, do you have a final word you would like to say about that?
During the last 10 years, several advances were carried out in this field in terms of accessible tourism and social tourism. The reality nowadays is completely different than 10 years ago, but I think that is not sufficient. I think that in the future, the research in this area should increase, and also the level of accessibility of tourism products. But I am optimist. I think that we have you have very, very, very interesting projects. We have also the involvement of tourism supply agents in several initiatives in this area. So I think that in the future, the accessibility of tourism industry will increase.
Thank you for this final optimist words, and I also can agree to that. Also from my perspective, a very singular one as a professor who suggests sometimes research projects and assignments, and this is an increasingly interesting topic. Many people, students, are interested in this, and I think this shows some of what Scott has talked about, and Lynn as well, this societal awareness. We keep thinking about it, having this in mind, and I think this is a good sign for the future too. And also this conference, I think it's is a sign of this, and I thank you very much for your contributions. I think we have to finish now. Thank you again. And if you have the opportunity to look at the rest of our program, you are very welcome. And we will continue in the afternoon at, what is it, 2 or 2:30, Celeste? Sorry. It's 2. Right? 2?
Sorry,
I think it's
yes.
2:30.
Yes,
2:30.
2:30.
No, it's 2. Sorry.
Is it? With a workshop on accessible tourism.
Yes, at 2 o'clock, we have that workshop on accessible tourism. Yeah. Thank you very much, and have a nice lunch break.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.